does so in a way that, frankly, I find unpalatable and I can't support. And what it does is it allows the utility providers to take the money and give back a portion of it, which I think aggregates to about $200 million, which I will show later as a fraction of what is actually overpaid. But then it allows them to take the extra money, the excess profits, and divert it into other projects. And so my first amendment strikes the language in the bill, which if you look at it on page 17 of 28, because I know you all printed it out and read it last night, it strikes about 60 languages of single-space text, which rather than paying the money back to the customers as refunds, instead has it be diverted into any types of projects, grid transformation projects, renewable projects, you name it, but eventually, essentially gets away from the whole concept of giving the money back to customers. And I have two problems with that. First of all, I like things simple. The money was overcharged, and it should be given back. Now, I don't reach back into the fiscal years of 2015 and 2016 because I think that money, unfortunately, is gone. But at least reaching back to fiscal year 2017 when we have a triennial review, which I'm not crazy about that either, but that process we would have that we could reach back to 2017, starting in 2017, and give the money back to the customers. That's the first objection. The second objection is what you've probably referred to as the double dipping issue, and that is this. I don't know how much folks know about utility economics, but here's essentially how it works. Utilities don't make money by delivering electricity to the customers, okay? That's basically a cost-based process. How they make money is by taking capital projects and putting that into what is called the rate base. When you put a project into the rate base, when you invest hundreds of millions of dollars, let's say you invest $100 million to build a substation or a small power plant, that project is then put into the rate base and you can charge a capital cost or a return of equity on it. That return of equity is typically about 10 to 11%. That's the national standard. You get that return on equity every year. So if you have a 30-year amortization of that power plant, you're getting that 10% every year. So that $100 million plant now has a $300 million payout over the life of that project. And that's not bad. I mean, that's just how economics works. But what we're allowing them to do is double dip. They avoid paying the refund to the customer, plus they put the project into the rate base so they recover these profits all the way down the line. Now, I know there's going to be arguments about, well, they'll freeze the rates and the base rates won't rise. You know as well as I do, every time there's a new project, for example, the new hydroelectric plant we've been talking about, it's going to go into what's called a rate adjustment charge, which is a charge above the line. So while the base rates should be refunded if they're overpriced, we won't be doing that because instead we'll be putting the money into other projects, grid transformation projects, whatever you want to call it. So what I've done with this amendment is strip out that language which diverts the refunds to another source and instead restores it back to the customers from whom the money came from in the first place. So that would be the First Amendment, and I move that you adopt the amendment. Thank you.
Thank the Senator. We're taking up both amendments 1 and 2.
Yes, sir.
Senior Senator from Virginia Beach. For what purpose does the Senator rise?
To speak against the amendment, Mr. President.
Senator has the floor.
And, Mr. President, in order to speak against this amendment, I got to give you a broader context of where we've been and where we are today. It was over a decade ago that this General Assembly passed something called the Virginia Energy Plan. For the first time, the first state that I'm aware of put a comprehensive energy plan and directed the governor every 4 years to develop that plan and build off of that plan. And that's been in place since prior to 2005 and continues forward to this day. And every 4 years, the governor, and I assume our Governor Northam is working on his energy plan right now, but every 4 years they put through this energy plan. And several years ago, because of the actions of the Obama administration and the Clean Power Plan, it became a concern about early shutdowns of numerous power plants. It would put us in a state of limbo that this General Assembly chose in a bipartisan manner to freeze the base rates for a period of time while we went through this period of uncertainty. And, Mr. President, let me tell you now, based on the current administration, the actions of the Supreme Court, we now have a degree of certainty at the federal level. But don't for a minute forget what's going on in state law. Today, as we talk for public hearing, and you're free to weigh in on it, is outgoing Governor McAuliffe's initiatives to decrease the carbon output of our existing utility structure within the Commonwealth of Virginia by 30%. That will soon be a regulation that's approved. Now, there's an additional part that would ask Virginia to join or direct Virginia to join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. I don't think they have the authority because it involves fee increases and new fees, and only this General Assembly can approve new fees. But it takes care of that part. But here's where we are today. I feel certain we're going to have regulations to request us, actually to insist that our utilities reduce their carbon output by 30%. And ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, we can reach that goal. We can reach that goal if we're prepared to make investments in the grid, if we're prepared to make investments in our solar and renewable energy, if we're prepared to make those types of things. Now, let me tell you what the bill does so you can put it in context, okay? As the senator from Fairfax City mentioned, there'll be $133 million of instant, if you will, credits back on electric bills for Virginia's electric consumers. That's this year. Next year, there'll be an additional $67 million. Under what Senator Peterson's going to propose, or the senator from Fairfax City is going to propose, will be a new rate case. We'll put a new rate case in. And we'll follow through on that rate case, and we'll move through and let the SEC do their thing. We're not going to consider any of this. We're going to operate in a vacuum. We're not going to consider for a minute that even now the Air Board and DEQ are moving forward these regulations. Let the SEC figure it out. It's their problem. That's what the senator from Fairfax City would have you do. Let them figure it out. If you think that's the right way to go, and there are probably people in this room that do, I think you should agree with that. And that's fine. I don't think so. You see, I don't think it's the job of the State Corporation Commission to decide how Virginia is going to produce electricity, where they're going to produce it, and how much to do it. They are not a policy organization down there. This chamber, right here in the chamber down the hall, we're the policy-making initiatives. The governor's office is to execute the policy and work with this General Assembly to develop that policy. And let me tell you where this bill is right now. This is not my work. This is not the work of the Commerce and Labor Committee. This is the work of the governor's office, of stakeholders across the board, environmental groups, the Manufacturing Association, across the board. This is a compromise. And like every compromise, and like every issue, there are going to be things you can pick at. There are going to be things you don't like. There's going to be a reason, everybody in this room, there's a reason, including myself, there's a reason for me to vote no on this bill. But there's 99 more reasons to vote yes on this bill. 99 more reasons why you should. This bill, make no mistake about it, sets us down a policy of a modern grid. Make no mistake about it, this bill sets us down the policy of integrating renewables into our mainstream. And not just a little bit of renewables, but 5,000 megawatts as a goal. Let me tell you, that is a whole lot of new solar power. Now, there are probably some on my side of the aisle that think, oh, that's that. But let me tell you something. I'm convinced after studying, and believe me, I spend a lot of time looking at this, that that's the new future. That's the future that we're headed for. The future of a smart grid. The future of what we're looking at, a grid ability to identify problems before they become problems. Ability, when there is a problem, to be able to identify that problem and fix it in a much more rapid manner. A grid that doesn't have those problems simply because we hardened that grid. We buried critical infrastructure where we knew there were going to be problems, where history tells us there's going to be problems. Bury transmission lines in areas where they might not be in the best interest of that community. And I speak to Northern Virginia when I speak to those particular issues. That's what this bill does. That bill sets policy. Doesn't say to the SEC, you figure it out. Make sure I get every nickel back. And I will tell you right now, under this bill, you could probably get a few more nickels back in your pocket. You could probably get a few more nickels in your pocket back. And what we won't get is the investment that we have to make, the investment that we need to make if we expect to have an economy here in Virginia and an energy grid and an energy power structure that we can be proud of, that represents the technology that we don't think is coming down the road, Mr. President. It's here today. And those states that implement it, those states that put it forward fast are those states that are going to prosper. Like any other new technology, like any other new thing, that state that jumps on board and those organizations that do tend to prosper. That's what this bill does. So we want to drill down on a specific language. We want to look at that. We just want to get these rate impacts. Let's let the SEC decide. You can't do a system upgrade by coming in on each and every individual rate case and try to say this. That is not the smart way. Anybody who's been in any type of contracting knows that you need a continuous to properly plan, to ensure that that money is invested wisely, needs a stream of revenue. In this case, it's around $200 million a year. A stream of revenue to do exactly what I talked about, to build out that smart grid, to harden that grid against both environmental conditions but also cyber conditions, to be able to have a grid that can take the renewables onto the grid. It's easy to say, I'm going to put 5,000 megawatts, but let me tell you, you have to make an investment in the grid in order to allow that to happen. You just can't put power on everywhere without making an investment in the grid to allow that power to actually flow. So you don't. These investments have to be made. And don't get us wrong, the Air Board is saying you will make it because you're going to reduce carbon by 30%. And the only way we get here is to do actions like this, to put it into place. But I just happen to think that perhaps we're on the right track. And there may be those behind me that shoot me in the back for saying that, But you know what? Look down. And for those that question that and say, why are you looking at this? Let me tell you, when I first started looking at this, 1 watt of solar was $3 to $4. $3 to $4. A watt of solar installed now on large projects is down to $1.20. $1.20 a watt. So you go to 1,000 megawatts, that's $1.2 billion to do the math. If you want to have a conventional power plant to produce 1,000 megawatts, it's $1.2 billion. Okay? Now, the solar's not going to produce at 1,000 megawatts all the time. Not going to happen. Sun goes down, cloud goes over, and it turns into night. But that solar panel doesn't need the fuel that $1 billion power plant does either. So there are no fuel costs. When we make these investments, and yes, we provide our utility $200 million. When we make these investments to do that, then we're making these investments for what area where we don't have to use as much fuel, where we don't have to produce as much carbon. But you know what? In the long run, we won't have to pay as much money. And I happen to think that's a great direction to go. But we've got to give our investor-owned utilities a mechanism to be able to make these investments to happen, a mechanism they sure it's going to happen. And this is all perspective over 10 years. Within this bill locks in those base rates that the senator from Fairfax said, locks in those base rates for 10 years. 10 years. And it says normally where if they made too much money during that 10-year period, or during an individual rate review, said you make too much, rather than credit it back to the customer, that becomes part of that $200 million revenue stream. And the utilities at this point that I've talked to are convinced that that's probably enough money to keep going for a long time into the future, where they might never have to come back for a rate adjustment clause. They may in the future. Who knows what the future holds? They may have to come back. But there's a steady stream of money, and later on it may require a rate adjustment clause on the back end to finish the build-out. But take a moment and look where we'll be at 10 years. We're locking in for 10 years. Don't you wish we could sit here today and say we're going to lock in health care benefits? Your health insurance premium is locked in for 10 years. Don't you wish we had that authority to do that? And ladies and gentlemen, I hope so. So when we talk about $100 million, and the senator will talk about these kinds of things, what are we talking about? We're talking about maybe $2, $3 a month more on the electric bill, $1 or $2 more. So with that, Mr. President, I'd like to yield the floor to the senior senator from Fairfax.
I thank the senator. For what purpose does the senior senator from Fairfax rise?
Speak on the amendments and to some lesser degree, far lesser degree of the bill.
Senator has the floor.
That. First off, what's important to know is that if we did this, if we accepted amendments 1 and 2, we would eliminate grid modification and the renewable investment credit. The capital projects that we are going to undertake under this bill they're not eligible to increase any base rates. And you can read lines 9 to 37 through 940, and also there cannot be any rate adjustment charge off of these. But let's talk about one question that came up, and I don't have a whole lot more to say beyond that, about money back to the customer. Back in 2007, we re-regulated the utilities. We deregulated them in the late 90s, and no one came in to offer, competitive rates, because Dominion's rates, and they still are the lowest in the Mid-Atlantic region by far, so we re-regulated them. As a result of that, and I think the senator from James City was involved in that, their first review was in 2011 for years 2009 and 10. And for 2009 and 10, they had over-earned $78 million on the assumption that the average house uses 1,000 megawatt hours a month, okay? 1,000 kilowatt hours per month, not kilowatt hours per month. The rebate on average was $2.84 a house, a credit, for 6 months. That's the money from a $78 million over-earning for a 2-year period. Average house, $2.84 credit for 6 months. In the review of 2013, for the years 2011 and 12, they under-earned, so nothing was done. Then in 2015, the last review, for the years 2013 and 14, they over-earned by a grand whopping total of $19 million. That same house that got $2.84 from the $78 million, for 6 months, they got a credit to their bill of 78 cents per house. Now, let me just tell you all this. 78 cents a month for 6 months and $2.84 a month for 6 months is not going to make anybody a threat to Warren Buffett or Bill Gates. And you ask yourself, as a society, are we better off spending that money on renewables, which for generations to come will dramatically not only clean our air up, but also lower our rates? And I think anybody who can do any basic math will tell you, yes, we are better off collectively as a society to do this. So, and this is the major premise of the bill, is how do we get to where we want to get? We got 5,000 megawatts of solar in that bill. And if you remember, in 2015, when we froze the rates, Senator McEachin and I, Senator Wagner, got put in there 500 megawatts of solar by 2020. They went past that last summer. 5,000 is what we put in there now. And let me tell you, 5,000 megawatts is 1,250,000 homes, okay? And now it's not 24 hours a day, as was pointed out. The sun's not out all the time, obviously. But if we don't start doing something now, we're never going to modernize our grid system. And there's over $1 billion that are givebacks in this bill from 2 utilities. Over $1 billion of givebacks. So I would hope that you all would reject amendments 1 and 2, and let's move the bill on and move the bill forward and modernize our grid. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the senator. For what purpose does the senator from Roanoke County, Senator Suderline, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak in favor of the amendments.
Senator has the floor.
There's a lot to go over in here, but just to address some of the comments that have been made about how great it would be if we could lock in prices. That was the debate that we had in 2015, if it was a good idea to freeze the rates. And there were several folks in this body who, including my predecessor, who were rightly concerned about the Obama administration's actions. But there were several of us that pointed out the rates weren't likely going to increase, or that the cost of electricity generation was not going to increase, and we shouldn't freeze the rates. And we pointed out that a publicly traded company with a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders would be acting irresponsible if they tried to freeze the rates in such a way so that their shareholders would not be getting the adequate return that they would be entitled to. And we didn't prevail that day, and the rates were frozen. And we saw what happened. And it wasn't a good thing for the ratepayer that the rates were frozen then. We also, at that time, a few years earlier, we were discussing fuel taxes and how we should assess the taxes on that. Well, if told you we're going to lock in the price of unleaded that you're going to pay at the gas station, and that's going to be good because you've seen the prices go up in recent years, you'd have been paying a lot more for fuel the last several years because prices don't always just go up. You know, we find that all the time. We found that in real estate several years ago too. But it does not benefit the ratepayer to have artificially high rates frozen, and that's what we found in the last 3 years. With this, the discussion of who should make the decision about investments in the grid, the constitutional obligation on issues such as this since 1902 has been the State Corporation Commission. When the General Assembly has intervened, we haven't done a good job. I know there was well-intentions in 2015 by a lot of folks that were really concerned, but we didn't do a good job with that. We would have been far better had the State Corporation Commission been able to execute its constitutional responsibility and reviewed the rates. And going forward, we should have the State Corporation Commission reviewing if investors or ratepayers, which are customers in every other sense of the word, or that they don't have a choice of where they're going to buy their electricity from, we should have the State Corporation Commission making that decision. And that was widely agreed upon until just a few years ago. If this bill passes without the amendment, we're not going to have refunds ever again. You will be so incentivized by the double dip provision. And the utilities have a very good idea. They've got brilliant people working there, and they've had a very good idea since the rate freeze went into effect how much they were earning based on what they would have earned had the rates been adjusted. And they'll be able to guess going forward. And some folks think that's good, and they'll be able to make the decisions to put that in there. I will not yield at this time. And I think we're going to have a lot of time to discuss this anyways. But if we had done that, we would be far better off had the State Corporation been able to make that decision rather than doing it. When it was just the comments that were made suggesting, you know, this is what's best for society, this goes to the fundamental questions that we have all the time on taxes. Are folks better off with the money in their pocket to make the decision how to spend it? Well, the folks that are supposed to make that decision on utility issues, on infrastructure versus price to customers with a regulated monopoly, is the State Corporation Commission. What we would be doing is stepping in and saying to the State Corporation Commission, no, we will not allow you to make this distinction, and we're going to continue going forward with this. And I have a feeling we're going to talk about it a little more, so I will yield the floor.
Will the gentleman agree with me that the State Corporation Commission still has to sign off on every one of these projects?
Senator, if you address your chair.
Gentleman yield for a question.
Will gentleman yield for a question?
I gave you a preliminary there, so you had time to prepare.
Will the senator yield?
One question or a series of questions?
No, just that one question.
Okay.
Would the gentleman agree
I'll
with
yield
me
for a
that
question.
Senator will yield for a question.
Just referred to, the State Corporation Commission still has to sign off on those projects. Would the gentleman agree with me to that?
I think that there's someone that is very eager to answer you.
I'll be happy to answer that question.
Oh, 1 second. 1 second. Does the senator want to answer or decline?
I'll yield to the senator whose amendment it is, who's very jumping at the bit to speak.
Senator from Fairfax City.
I would answer the gentleman that the State Corporation Commission looks at public necessity. And if there's a public necessity for the project, and if they bring it forward and show the public necessity, that's fine. But what they cannot do is decide whether the profitability one, because the profitability, the return on equity, is already locked into statute. So all they can determine is the public necessity. My objection to what is happening in this bill is that you're taking, again, something that's going to be built anyway and now you're taking what was a customer refund, and instead you're diverting it for that project just because there will be a public necessity for it sometime down the road. That, to me, is irrelevant to this question of refunds.
Will that gentleman yield for a question?
Well, Senator Yield.
I'll yield all day long.
All right.
Senator Yield. Senator has the floor.
You made the statement it was going to be built anyway. Under what premise do you base that statement on?
I don't know of a
Senator
state,
has the floor.
I don't know of a state in the union that over the course of the next 20 to 30 years won't be building a new power plant or some type of new power facility.
Senior Senator from Virginia Beach, a further question?
No, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay. Thank the senator. Senator from James City County. What person does the senator rise?
Mr. President, I would like to move the pending question on these two amendments.
Thank the senator. Question is, shall the pending question be ordered? All in favor of the motion will record their votes aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 30, noes 10.
Ayes 30, noes 10. The pending question has been ordered. The question is, shall floor amendments 1 and 2 be agreed to? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Seeing at least 8 hands, we will have a recorded vote. All in favor of agreeing to the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 12, noes 27.
Ayes 12, noes 27. Floor amendments 1 and 2 fail.